Welcome everybody. To start the evening, I'm Clay Greenbank. I'm your General Manager of Leadership Performance for MinRes, and I've got the wonderful opportunity tonight to MC this event, this Mind Matters event, where we seek to normalise conversations around mental health. I'm filling in for the wonderful Chris Harris. Unfortunately, Chris has got himself a little case of the COVID and he's found himself at home, but he's going to join us tonight. He's actually going to join us via technology. So we're actually getting Chris 2.0, which is going to be wonderful. Magnified version of Chris, so incredible stuff. So look, I'm privileged to fill in for him. I feel great privilege. Got some incredible guest speakers who are going to join us tonight and speak around mental health. So what a wonderful opportunity. We're at the West Australian Museum. We're at Boola, Bardip, and we'll be viewing life through a different lens, and a tremendous opportunity. I'd like to start the evening by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land, the traditional owners, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. Pay our respects to the elders past and present, the land on which we are tonight. I'd also like to extend this acknowledgement to all traditional owners where our people are operating today across our various projects and operations. Now, just before we get underway, we've got a little bit of housekeeping we need to navigate through. Firstly and foremost, we are recording this event tonight. I want to highlight the point that we are able to get up and move about throughout the course of the evening, so if we want more drinks or some snacks or canapes, whatever it may well be, please feel free to do so, but just be mindful of the fact that we are actually recording, and we're recording for the benefit of those that can't join us tonight across the projects, families and friends at home or abroad or whatever it needs to be. Part of that as well, equally, mobile phones. Can we check them, please? Make sure they're off. There'll be no Facebooking throughout the course of the evening. That's a no. And the next one for us is just in the event of emergency, there will be an alarm, there will be an audible alarm. And I've been advised by the wonderful staff here at the museum that they have a special response team that will join us here in the room and guide us out of the building safely to a muster point designated downstairs below. So in the event of an emergency, I would suggest... Who was that? All right. I would suggest we're well practiced. For those that were at MinRes 20 Waters Drive this week, we're well practiced in the evacuation. So if we have a repeat of that, we'll give it another go, and we'll see how we go. Toilets are located on the left-hand side as we came in, male and female, of course. And the other thing, just on the drinking side of it and also the smoking side of it, it is government property here. So please, any drinks inside, no smoking outside within the grounds. They would have to go out to the roadside for that. Piece. Alrighty, let's get ourselves underway. A little bit of an introduction before we move across to our guest speakers. So firstly and foremost, it's my great pleasure to welcome some very special guests here tonight with whom we partner in the mental health awareness space. A very warm welcome to the Telethon Kids Institute, to Youth Focus, to Lifeline WA, to Shooting Stars, to Murdoch University, and also to the Y that have joined us this evening. A very special thank you to the CEO, the new CEO of the Foundation for the WA Museum, Coralie Bishop. Coralie, are you with us tonight? Hello, Coralie, thank you. Now, MinRes proudly supports the Foundation's Special Exhibitions Gallery here at the West Australian Museum, Boola, Bardip, helping to bring world-class exhibitions and programs to the people of Western Australia. For those of you who went on the tour this afternoon, there's a few of us who went through the tour. Yep, great experience. Fantastic. It's encouraged you to return, bring family, bring friends, bring the children along to enjoy the great exhibition and the newest of exhibition, the Dinosaurs of Patagonia. I also encourage you to have a look around this great historic hall. Take advantage of the moment that we've got with us right now, a little bit of mindfulness, a bit of presence to appreciate the hall that we're in right now. You might have noticed above us is our friend Otto. Otto is a blue whale. Otto was found in Busselton in 1897, washed ashore. Incredible creature. This historic hall as well, we might notice the stairwells, the spiral stairwells in the library above. It's all part of the original build from 1913. So it's an incredible facility we're in tonight, and it sets the context, it sets the tone very nicely. But it's also an environment I think we all take advantage of tonight and sit here and just have a little moment of presence, a little bit of mindfulness, and appreciate what's in front of us. It's fantastic. Now, to get us underway, there's a little bit of a kickstart to the night, to the evening. We've got a few door prizes that are going to be handed out throughout the evening, but we've got one first and foremost, one to start the evening. So, firstly and foremost, could we all check under our chairs for the first door prize?
It's Oprah show.
Hey, look out. Now, congratulations. You have won a magnificent building called 20 Walters Drive in Osborne Park. You may need some support to take that home with you this evening. All right. Now, there's a couple of tickets there to the Bar Before Time held exhibition that MinRes supports here within the museum, where you can mingle with the stars of the dinosaurs of the Patagonia and everything else. Fantastic. There'll be a couple more prizes throughout the course of the night to enjoy. All righty. Speakers. We've got some wonderful speakers this evening. Tonight, I'm delighted. I'm actually thrilled. I've had some great conversations to get the night started already. I've got some wonderful people in front of me, or beside me, I should suggest. We've got Jenny Allen. Jenny, to my left here, is the former CEO of the foundation of the West Australian Museum. We've got the wonderful Dr. Nicole Hill joining us this evening from the Telethon Kids Institute. And the gentleman on my far left probably needs no introduction, but the incredible MinRes brand ambassador, the wonderful Russell James, is joining us. So we're in for an eventful evening. It's going to be fantastic. And already for myself, it's been a great exposure. It's been a great opportunity, I should suggest, to be able to stand and speak and listen to these individuals. So throughout the course of the night, they'll all speak, present some slides and show some pieces and share some insights. At the end, there is going to be a great opportunity to engage, to ask some questions. And I would strongly suggest, let's take advantage of this opportunity we have in front of us tonight and think of some great questions that we can ask and keep the conversation alive and the focus where it should be placed in the regards to the mental health space. Alrighty, now, with further introduction, the incredible, our mental health champion, a gentleman that many of us have only ever seen upside down on video. I had to make sure I phrased that correctly. The remarkable, the incredible, Mr. Chris Harris. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Clark. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
What's that, sir?
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, you're wonderful, mate, and you look magnificent, by the way.
What? Wonderful. Yeah, I'm not at home. I'm up in Wodgina.
You have changed that multiple times this evening. A minute ago, you were sort of in a nice decor background, and now we're sort of finding you up in the Pilbara. You get around a little bit.
I get around. I'm adaptable, Clay, as you know.
Fantastic, mate. Chris, I'm going to pass it over to you. You've got a great presentation you want to share. You want to set the context. This is very much your event. Thank you very much for the opportunity to stand here and support you through this. But you take it away, my friend.
Clay, Jenny, Nicole, Russell, what a privilege it is to be presenting alongside of you. And part of my role within mental health has been to try and explain or unpick some of the psychological theories, and so that it makes sense for the everyday person. And I'd like to do that again today. And I'd like to start by looking at what's called crystalline or cognitive lenses. Now, most of you know that I wear glasses, and without those glasses, it's difficult for me to focus on any number of things. And when I go and get a new pair of glasses and I put them on, I kind of notice how many wrinkles I've got over the years and how many spots, and everything kind of becomes so much more clear. Now, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do that with what we call our cognitive lenses, about how we see life and where we're positioned within life? Now, technology hasn't advanced sufficiently enough where we can simply put on a new pair of glasses and we can see life with a slightly different perspective to navigate those challenges. But research within the neurosciences is actually taking us in that direction, where we can actually start to understand that we can make adjustments to the lenses that we see life through, that we can make adjustments to our beliefs and what our future looks like. And I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. It's not random that there's a synergy, between the vision of Jenny Allen and the detail of Nicole's research, and the lens through which a phenomenal man, Russell, has introduced so many people to the world through not only early days, but also more recently through some of the artwork. Cognitive refers to our thoughts, our beliefs, and those thoughts and our beliefs can determine what we focus on, like the lens of a camera. And I want to run you through a little bit of some of the people I've interacted with over the past year and explain how we use some of this theory within therapy. Before doing that, I'd like to just reflect or take a bit of time to focus on the past year and everything that you've done, you people sitting in the room and our 5,000 employees, what a year it's been. We set ourselves a sustainability target of at least 5% of our staff engaging in psychological support, either through myself or through our employee assistance program. The industry average is about 4.1%. And in the past year, 8.7% of our staff have engaged in psychological support, and that is phenomenal. What this says to me is that we're having conversations around mental health much earlier, and the conversations we're having are more capacity-based rather than problem-focused. And it's because of the lens you're looking at mental health and the conversations you're having with one another that's led to this 8.7% of us kind of reaching out for that psychological support. That's a fantastic outcome. We've published 3 research publications, which is absolutely fantastic. 500 people have engaged in mental health literacy. 150 people are now mental health first aid trainers, and we're fortunate to be involved in the Resourceful Mind pilot, with 20 of our staff being trained as mental health minders, and we're about to extend that in the next year with increasing our peer support network. So what a fantastic year it's been, but tonight is about looking forward and looking differently through those lenses. Now, this comment may seem a little bit ridiculous, but most psychological theory can be explained in kind of day-to-day activities. So let's take driving for an example. So many of us have had driving lessons. Probably a few of us could do with a few more driving lessons. There may be some young people in the audience who are undertaking driving lessons. Now, for most of you who drove to Boola Bardip tonight, I'd like to ask, and if I asked you, what percentage of the time did you spend looking out of the windscreen? Clay, what do you imagine most people would say? How much time do they spend looking out of the windscreen? An awful lot. We would estimate about 80% of the time is spent looking out of the windscreen, and the other 10 to 20% is spent looking at the dashboard or the rear view mirror. Now, this is really important, and especially around mental health. We're actually hardwired to look forward and to look outwards. And when we start looking at the detail too much, it can start to become problematic. Now, don't get me wrong. If you imagine driving home, looking at your dash is really important. We have the speedo that allows us to know if we're driving at a safe speed. We know if we've got petrol, we know if we've got fuel. If we need to, we can take it into a mechanical look into it in more detail, all with the goal of actually moving forward. But ultimately, we are wired as I guess, people to look forward and to look outwards. So achieving mental well-being, achieving psychological flexibility, is the ability to actually move between looking at the dashboard, looking at the mirrors, and then moving back to looking outwards of where we want to go. Moving seamlessly from the magnification to panorama. So let's start with the narrow end, the detail. Russell, I understand these photographs are taken by yourself up in Wodgina, and thank you so much, and they capture a phenomenal image. So the one we're looking at now, of course, is the detail of some beautiful flowers up in Wodgina. Now, detail is really important, but we also have to accept that when we're looking at the detail, we're actually missing other information. Now, some of my colleagues are asking through research, are we spending too much time focusing on the detail and looking down? Are we spending too much time looking at our phones, looking at emails, looking at followers, Facebook likes? And have we moved away from looking outwards and kind of engaging in what's around us? Now, this becomes problematic in mental health when somebody focuses too much on the detail. For 20 years, I have had the privilege of working with people and their families in eating disorders, and specifically anorexia. And this is a disorder where the detail becomes too acute, where the weight or the size or the calories become too great a focus, and the person misses out on all those other wonderful qualities that they have. And we call this what's called weak central coherence, or a difficulty of actually moving between the detail, the dashboard, and the bigger picture, the panorama, the windscreen through there. And a lot of the work that we do is how we encourage people to recognise, is this a detail moment or a bigger picture moment. So in our brain, don't want to bore people, but you have this thing called the salience network. Nicole's probably heard of this, and it's basically a network that says we focus on the things that are most important to us. So many of you who have gone out and bought a new car, you'll be driving along and you may make this comment, which is, I start to see those cars everywhere. They're not everywhere, and nobody's put those cars on the road, but this is our salience network coming into play. And what it does is that our brain picks up or prioritises only the information that we tell it to prioritise or pick up on. Now, you can imagine why in mental health that this could be problematic. If a person says, I can't do anything right, then that's what they start to focus on. And they start to miss everything else that's kind of that they've experienced and all the good things about them. So brain hack number one for the evening. I want people to think about what they instruct their brain to do, the lens of which they're looking through. Because even though our brain is phenomenally complicated and we actually know very little about it, it's also actually highly obedient. And as we go through, what we're wanting you to do is to start to look at possibilities and opportunities rather than getting caught on the detail. It's about set shifting, creating a cohesive picture of who we are and the environment that we're in, and to determine if it's a magnification moment or whether it's a panoramic perspective. Okay, so don't get me wrong, the detail is really important. When we have a look at the likes of Nicole's research, which is phenomenal, we hear some of that recently, it's really important that we focus in on the detail. The detail allows us to understand something so much more. But ultimately understanding that detail, like Nicole's research and understanding around suicide hotspots that she'll talk us through, is actually to help prolong the lives of young people so that they can live a better life. So Nicole and researchers kind of focus in on the details driven by a vision in order to then look outwards and improve the lives of young people. However, it's important to know that it's not functional to spend too much time in the detail, that we look up and we apply some of that data to the real world and how that influences people's lives. If we go back to our driving metaphor, if you spent 80% looking at the dash driving home tonight, it would be a very scary drive home, B, a very slow drive home, but none of those would be very functional. And within mental health, what we're wanting to do is open up people's perspective to move from the detail to the bigger picture. When somebody is depressed, where do they normally look? They look down. They might say things like, my tank's empty. I don't know where I'm heading. It's not future focused. When somebody is anxious, they may look around, they may look behind them, but they're not looking forward. And they may say, I'm not sure where to go. The role of mental health is about how to lift the person up. Because when a person's feeling empowered, where are they looking? They're looking outwards. When a person's feeling confident in themselves, where are they looking? They're looking outwards and they're looking forwards. I was with a young person, 16-year-old, a couple of weeks ago with one of our staff and one of their parents. And I was thinking of this, and I asked the young person who'd been depressed for some time, and I said, could you tell me about the last time that you climbed a tree? And they looked at their parent and they looked back at me and they quietly said, I've never climbed a tree, Chris. And I said, oh, this is really important. A couple of years ago, I was doing a talk with Craig Challen, Dr. Craig Challen. He was the vet and one of the deep cave divers that got the Thailand soccer team out from the caves there. And when we were talking, one of the parents in the audience asked and said, Dr. Challen, do you think the rescue would have been as successful if it was Australian kids? And without hesitation, he said, no, it wouldn't have been. And a parent said, why is that? And he said, because our kids don't climb enough trees anymore. And what he meant by that was his suggestion was whether we'd stopped kind of exploring, scuffing our knees, engaging in the landscape, and that perhaps that we weren't, resilience wasn't being developed, but we weren't that we were perhaps extinguishing resilience. And for us within mental health, the importance of kind of engaging in community, the landscape, the connectedness to country becomes ever so important when we think of that. Brain hack 2. If we'd like to actually feel closer to somebody, walk alongside them. Sometimes as a couple, and if they're struggling, they may go out for dinner. Don't know any couple that have been struggling, you think, yep, we'll go out for dinner, and they sit opposite one another at the table, and there's this kind of a tenseness that sits there. And you try and make conversation, and you look at the wine bottle, and you read off the label, and you point to other couples, and then the meal finishes, and you're thinking, thank goodness for that. And you walk outside, and you hold hands, and as you're walking along, you go, wow, look at that moon, and the conversation starts. Because that closeness comes from when we walk alongside and when we're looking forward. And there's some data recently that says when we move forward, our eyes move laterally from side to side. And when our eyes move laterally from side to side, it induces calmness. So we're starting to learn more of the science and the theory behind some of what we thought was just instinctive as you go along. So as we're coming towards the end, we're hardwired to look outwards. It's why as species we find lookouts. We find the point where we can look across the landscape. If somebody said, hey, I've got a great lookout, come and take a look at this, and they just took you along the road and showed you a tree, you'd kind of go, wasn't what I was expecting. We look at the stars, we look at the sunsets, we appreciate this. And that's because it's what drives us. Looking forward creates opportunity. The future is full of opportunity. I was seeing a 39-year-old guy a few weeks ago, thoughts of suicide, depressed mood. And he comes in and his schema or his thought or his cognitive lens is, I can't do anything right, Chris. I've tried, but I can't do anything right. And through some of the things that we're talking about tonight and kind of even using the driving lessons and looking out, we start to explore that, and he eventually gets to a point where he says, Chris, there's many things that I've done right. And I'm going to notice those and remember them. And there's many things I'd like to do better, including elements of being a dad. But I'm going to watch out for those and I'm going to work on them. Now, that particular view is one of opportunity, it's one of future, it's one of optimism. He's moved from the staring at the dash to looking out of the windscreen. But a really important next brain hack for people sitting here is that if your goal is to head west, don't start walking east. And what I mean by that is if you have somewhere you're looking at and you want to go, take the steps and actions that move you in that direction. And it may seem really obvious, but you'd be surprised that many people will say, I'd like to be fit, but they don't go to the gym. They walk in the other direction. And you know, like people over tens of thousands of years, is commit to actions that increases your likelihood of getting towards that goal. And for that man I just spoke about, that's going to be part of his journey. A growth mindset is where somebody moves from I haven't reached my potential to I haven't reached my potential yet. And that changes everything. As I'm about to finish, I kind of want to share, again, just kind of one more scenario. And what I'm hoping is that through my conversation and our speakers that we're going to hear shortly is that there's things that interest you. There are things that challenge you. There are questions that come to mind, and that you use the last 30 minutes to have those discussions with the five of us who are on stage. But a 26-year-old young lady, history of trauma, domestic violence. Been seeing her, and when we got talking, she described herself as in a constant state of escaping bad situations, escaping a belief that she was a bad person, and she's not. Now, again, we started to use some of the concepts that I've been talking to you about tonight, and I started to go, how did you get out of those situations? And she started to describe how she found a way out, the timing. And I said, wow, the ability to find those opportunities. And I said, I see that more as an explorer than an escapist. And she went, wow, I hadn't thought of it like that. And I said, I'd like to hear more about your ability to explore and what the future looks like. On the way out, I said, this new building is your building as well, because she works on site with us. I said, I'll show you the restaurant, even though it's not open, because it's your restaurant. It's all of our restaurant. We went up to Benny's, and anyone that's been there, and we looked out from Benny's, and she went, wow, there's lakes there. I've never seen those before. And we turned to one another, and she'd said, that's what you've just been teaching me, isn't it, Chris? And I said, yeah, sometimes we can't always see that which is in front of us, and we miss it. And if I'd said to that person on the ground floor, trust me, there's a lake there, she probably wouldn't have. But through that experience, she took away the fact that sometimes when we reposition ourselves, that the future, that what can be, looks very, very different. It's full of opportunities. So mineral resources, we're about bringing that wellness to life. It involves shifting from the detail to the panorama and back again. The trick is for each of us to recognise in our lives, is this a detail moment or a panoramic moment? Looking outwards to what's possible, how we can be the best of what we put our minds to. That if we're going to walk west, that we commit actions to walking west. And this is what makes us different at Mineral Resources. We have a beautiful building. We're going to have resorts. I'm thinking of the people out on site that allow people to look outwards across the landscape. Now, with that building and the opportunity to look at the panorama, boy, oh boy, did we look at the detail over years. The detail is important in order to look outwards. Brain hack number 5 to finish us off. Look outwards with generosity and gratitude. Be thankful of where you've come from and be thankful of where you are. And as you look forward and you look out, whether through a windscreen or through the lens of your life, realise that you have opportunity and choices, and that there are people there to support you as you make those choices. Thank you for the opportunity to set the scene for this evening. Thank you very much, Clay, for stepping in at such short notice, but that's what we're about. We're about teamwork and about stepping in for one another when we need others to do so. I'm looking forward to hearing from the other speakers and involved in the panel discussion in a little while. Thanks, Clay.
Fantastic, Chris. Thank you. Just always amazing to listen to Chris speak, and obviously the passion that goes with It's a key piece. Look, a couple of key takeaways from A Good Self, Chris, just listening to your speech. You're still with us, aren't you?
Certainly, yep.
Fantastic, great. The lake that you speak of, when you go up to the restaurant at 20 Wardles Drive on floor 12 there and you look out at that lake, that was arguably the greatest challenge for Russell, Ali, Mark Wilson, Chris Ellison and co to put that lake in place for us. And we appreciate the effort that went into that because it's really valued. So look, on a serious note there, Chris, from A Good Self, you made a couple of comments that resonate strongly from A Good Self and, the work that you and I speak of. And a couple of key words that bounced around for me was we speak of balance, we speak of psychological flexibility, we speak about climbing trees. And the last piece that you highlighted, we also speak about connection with other people, having people around us. And I think that's crucial. That's so important, isn't it? That we have people that help us on this journey of life and sometimes help us notice the things that are out there and look at the big picture, so to speak. For your good self, Chris, question, like many of us in a modern, fast-paced world, there would have been a period of time when you were too focused on the detail too much of the time. What was the moment for you that you actually decided I was going to climb more trees?
I've been fortunate in my life to do things like the Kokoda Trail with young people, who are having difficulties, bungee jumps, etc. I think I've always built that into my life, Clay. In fact, if you ask people in the audience who know me, and I asked and said, do you think I'm kind of bigger picture and need a bit of a pull backwards to the detail sometimes? That some of the people would probably say yes. So I'm naturally kind of bigger picture landscape, and I have to be pulled back to the detail more often. So I can be a little bit out there. But the other, I think, for me, Clay, was understanding the importance, and say that we'll hear from each of the speakers is it's a bit like research with the detail. What I love is then how do we apply that? How does it make a difference in a person's life? Whether it's Jenny and her role and through Youth Focus and the difference it makes in her life, or Russell's work and his artwork and the difference that makes in people's lives. And I guess that's what my ultimate drive is I want to get people from the therapy room actually out into life. So yeah, I think I've always been that way.
Great, Chris, wonderful. Again, thank you very much to Chris, and we're going to hear plenty more from Chris throughout the evening as well. He's going to stay live with us virtually and be available for the questions at the end as well. It's now my great pleasure that I have the honour of being able to introduce the wonderful Jenny Allen. Jenny is the former CEO of the Foundation of the West Australian Museum and the former CEO of Youth Focus. During her 16 years with Youth Focus, Jenny's significant contributions to the sector were recognised within Western Australia as the West Australian of the Year Community Award in 2013. Her nomination as the only woman finalist in WA, or for WA I should suggest, in the 2014 Australian of the Year Awards, and also the John De Silva Award for Lifetime Achievement in the mental health sector at the 2015 Mental Health Goods Outcomes Awards. So great pleasure to bring Jenny up to the podium. Thank you very much.
I'll just make sure this doesn't fall down. Well, what a privilege it is to be here with you this evening and being involved in Mind Matters series. As you've heard a little bit about my relationship with Chris Harris, it's also, I really want to talk to you about relationship with mineral resources. It's entwined through many years and several career changes for me in that time. The longest as CEO, as you've just heard, of Youth Focus, which I have to say, I loved my time there. The longest as CEO of Youth Focus, my careers in mental health and also more recently in the arts and culture area as a CEO. And it's given me many insights, not only into philanthropy, but what it is that pulls the heartstrings of individuals and organisations that want to support, give but they also want to own the vision of that not-for-profit. Chris and Tia Ellison have supported me personally and Youth Focus some 10 years ago. Firstly at the Youth Focus Ball, which we put together at the very beginning of my time there. Then always at the Polo in the Valley with the Prendervilles, and of course through the infamous Hawaiian Ride for Youth, which is still operating and just had its 20-year anniversary. I actually recall opening the mail one night, and I was actually in bed when I did it because I would often take the mail home. And I noticed that there was a letter from Chris Ellison, and out fell a cheque for $250,000. I have to tell you, I nearly fell out of bed with shock. And I have to say that, you know, in those days, funding was paramount in a not-for-profit organisation, just the same as it is these days for NFPs to actually survive. But I guess what I need to say to you is it's not just about funding, it's about partnering, it's about relationships, it's about working together. So I joined Youth Focus in early 2000, and it was an organisation, when I look back, that we had 3 people, and I so wanted to do something to make it more than the struggling organisation it was. And I have to say, at the time when I got there, I really nicknamed it the cowboy outfit. It really had so much opportunity, but there was lots we had to actually do to make it a successful organisation that it is today. And I suppose the thing that I really remember was that the people involved really wanted to help young people who were struggling. And they were struggling with life, they were struggling in so many different ways. And back in 2000, let me tell you, mental health was not on anybody's lips. And often it ended disastrously for those young people. Either that they ended up incarcerated or they ended up taking their own lives. So 22 years has somehow disappeared. I don't think I look any different, but many of you will think I do. It's amazing, as we get older, we don't really think that we are any different. But I guess along the way, like Chris has actually brought to the fore, is we do change. You know, we don't just look inwards, we look outwards, we look at all sorts of things. And that phrase that, you know, you put an old head on young shoulders. But anyway, the vision that we had at the time was to make that difference with Youth Focus and to make a difference with the young people. But my thought was, well, how and what was going to allow us to have clarity and maintain the vision? Because when we started, the government decided that they would send everybody to us that they couldn't find a space for somewhere. And we were, as I said, we were a real cowboy outfit. And we had to really bring it back and look at the detail, to quote Chris, and say, well, what can we do and what can we really do well? You know, we can't be everything to everybody, but we certainly can look at putting a strategy together and a vision that we can stick to, and maybe the young people that we were trying to help, we would do a better job at it than when I first got there. So we looked at ways also to engage the corporate world, the business world, to tell our story that existed around young people and mental health. And again, in those days, in 2000, people in the corporate world were really not very supportive of the not-for-profit industry. And it wasn't probably for any reason that they probably hadn't been asked to be supportive in lots of ways. And in the early days, the support meant not only volunteering, but some of the companies giving us in-kind services, helping us with opportunities that we couldn't provide. Number one, we didn't have any funding. Number two, we didn't have the staff. So, people did that. So we decided that one of the ways that we could actually tell our story and have people really learn about mental health and where our young people were headed, which in those days wasn't in a good space, we decided to put some successful events together, which I've just mentioned to you. And they became very successful. I think, for instance, Ride for Youth over 20 years has brought in something like $15 million in that time to help young people. But we looked at the lack of services in the regional areas. There were almost none in those days. Thus, the ride was the thing that we looked at, going through the regional areas and how can we run that. We also looked at starting a young men's project because I had a real push for the fact that so many people that were struggling were young men, and we lost more young men to suicide than we did women in those days. And so that project still exists today, and Chris Harris was very much part of that. And what happened was that people that we got involved in it, everybody from people like Professor Pat McGorry, we had people from all over Australia involved in that project. And it started to become very successful, and people started to take notice of what we were doing. So the thing is, how do you hold on to a vision when it seems like an impossible dream? My belief is that it's determination. It's never losing sight of that elusive goal. And when you fall down, and most organisations in the not-for-profit area at some stage of the game have gone up and down, that you can get back up and start again, or look at what you're doing and say, well, we need to change this. And there's nothing wrong with falling down, and there's nothing wrong with making changes. And we did that often over the 16 years that I was at Youth Focus. So with building blocks, we commenced to find corporate partners. A new area, as I've mentioned, in the mental health area, because people really didn't know very much about mental health. And I can remember going into boardrooms and doing a presentation, and the CEOs of some of those very big companies would almost dive under the table because it was really too much for them to hear that young people were taking their own lives and that they were not in a good space. So in the early days, we gained momentum and we gained success, and we continued to come with a lot of help, but especially in the early years, we begged, we borrowed, and we continued to tell our story. And I often used to say to people I had camel knees because I was always down on it begging for help of some description, not just financial but other help. So the same determination and grit was also the story with the Foundation for the WA Museum, which is another of MinRes's areas of support, which you've just heard about. You've been and looked at the latest international exhibition upstairs of the Argentinian Patagonian dinosaurs, and mineral resources in the fund that they're involved in has been part of bringing that to Perth. I guess that what can be seen is that you sit in this wonderful building, which we've talked about, and for me, it's about looking at our community, our children, our grandchildren, and being able to bring them to things like that international exhibition. And as I've said, without the support of people like MinRes, Mineral Resources and others, we couldn't do that. The museum is government, the foundation is a private enterprise. We couldn't do it without that help. And I often look around and think, well, why don't people want to support? Why don't businesses want to be proud to be a supporter and to showcase whatever that not-for-profit organisation is that you are passionate about? So I stepped down just 1 month ago after 5.5 years from the CEO role, and I leave it in the capable hands of Coralie Bishop and the team that's there. And Coralie is with us tonight. She will take this very successful foundation to the next steps and it will continue on its successful journey, I'm sure. So, as you can see from what I have to say, there's a circle that exists, and I think Chris actually brought that up. And it's around people like Chris Harris, and as you've been told, a colleague who I employed at Youth Focus and a friend. It's about people like Chris and Tia and Mineral Resources who wish to leave a better place, and the journey is one of relationships, it's one of commitment, where all of us are involved. We need to support one another and make great inroads into the areas that need that support, and especially around our well-being and our mental health. At the moment, after COVID, I think you'd have to agree, and I think the eastern states, when I talk to people like Pat McGorry, is in far worse shape than we are mental health-wise, because they really were locked down and really locked down. And so, our well-being is so important, and I very much admire what Mineral Resources is doing for all of you people. They believe in you, and they believe in making sure that your lives are about well-being and mental health resilience. So I'd like to leave you with one thought tonight. How amazing that 10 years ago you consider that Youth Focus actually may have helped a person or persons in this room. And they are now able to live a healthy life and come out the other end as a productive part of society. If there was only one person that the support from people like Mineral Resources and others were able to give, how fantastic is that? One never knows who you have helped, and that for me is the thrill. It's sobering, and it creates that great warm feeling that we as human beings have when we do something good for someone else. Thank you very much.
Look, fantastic and just so motivating, inspiring to listen to the level of passion, perseverance, grit that Jenny over her tenure and time at Youth Focus and also at the Foundation for the Museum is committed to. So just fantastic. I think that deserves a second round of applause, so thank you very much. Alrighty, moving on to our next guest. I'd like to introduce Dr. Nicole Hill. Now, Nicole is an internationally respected research fellow with a strong track record in suicide prevention research at the Telethon Kids Institute. It's a very sad fact that's not often talked about. Suicide is the leading cause of death for young people in Western Australia. More than just statistics, they are young lives whose loss affects us all. Which is why we've chosen to support a new research program at the Telethon Kids Institute that aims to boost mental health services and prevent youth suicide in at-risk communities. Led by Dr. Hill, the Community Strengths in Suicide Prevention Project will use hospital and coronal suicide data to identify mental health hotspots in WA and then work with communities to tailor solutions to help improve youth mental health and wellbeing. As a principal partner for the project, Mineral Resources will support Dr. Hill as part of our $10 million 5-year commitment to Telethon, aimed at ensuring more children and young people have access to much needed health services and support. Dr. Nicole has worked as a consultant for local governments alongside stakeholders including WA Police, mental health services and non-for-profit organisations. And she has now also been recognised yet again for amazing work with the Medical Journal of Australia Award for Excellence in Medical Research for a paper on youth suicide. This relates to a cross-sectional analysis of national coronal data study in which Nicole examined countless coronal reports on youth suicide and really set the scene for the work that MinRes is supporting. And finally, we'd like to congratulate Nicole, who has recently been awarded the 40 Under 40 Award and is a finalist for the Premier's Science Award to be announced in a couple of weeks. I'm actually just exhausted reading that. So I'm going to ask the question early. What, do you do anything in your spare time?
Chris, what?
Welcome.
Chris, what's
Welcome.
the right answer there? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, that's always a very tricky question. I think when you work in a field like suicide prevention, it affects a lot of people, and it's something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And so I think sometimes that fusion between work and life, it's a life mission. So the boundaries aren't as clear cut as it is for a typical 9-to-5 job. So I just wanted to start the talk today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we meet here today, and pay respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge that in Aboriginal young people, suicide rates are 5 times greater than in our non-Aboriginal young people, and so it's a significant problem and something that I'd like to keep in mind with the research that I'm presenting with you today. And I'd also like to acknowledge those of you in the room that have lived and living experience of suicide and suicidal behaviour. We know that people who have experienced a suicide loss are deeply affected. And I hope that the research I'm presenting for you today gives you a glimpse into some of the awesome initiatives that are being taken on board here in Western Australia to reduce the impact of those losses. So I always like to start with this slide. In Australia, every year, 50% of suicides that occur each year will occur in people under the age of 49. And in young people aged between 10 to 24 years, it's the leading cause of death, which means when we look at all other causes of death, whether it's childhood illness, accidents, more of those deaths in young people will be caused by suicide than any other cause. So it's a significant problem here in Australia. And I've put this slide up because for the last almost 3 decades, at a federal level, we've had a national mental health and suicide prevention policy, and these are some of the key milestones that we've had over the past nearly 3 decades, beginning with the first National Youth Suicide Prevention Strategy in 1995. We've seen that progress over the years, and if we move to 2014, where we had a National Mental Health Commission review into mental health and other services to identify significant gaps, things like long wait list times and access to those services amongst people experiencing mental health challenges. And then we moved on to the 5th National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan, which really acknowledged the idea that mental health isn't just the role of clinicians, but we need a whole of government and a systems approach to both suicide prevention and strengthening the mental health of Australians. And then we've seen that progress even further up until 2021, where we had a budget of $2.3 billion put into mental health and suicide prevention. And these are just some of the key areas that were targeted, including bolstering aftercare services for people who are discharged from emergency departments, and also in postvention and bereavement support, where it really was the first time nationally where we had funding allocated to support people who had lost someone to suicide. Some of the research I've done has shown that people who are exposed to suicide experience a 3 times greater risk of suicide themselves, and we call that suicide contagion. And what we know is that if we can get support in place early, then we can prevent further losses from occurring. But if we have a look just at the last decade and some of these key milestones, and we map them to youth suicide rates, what we can see is that despite significant public health and government investment in suicide prevention, the number of youth suicides in Australia haven't substantially declined. In fact, they haven't declined at all. And this isn't to say that the investment and the initiatives that are taking place aren't working. I think that if they weren't there, we might see a much steeper increase in those suicides. But what it tells us is perhaps we need to be thinking about things differently, or using data to really help understand what we need to be doing in addition to current efforts so we can actually see an appreciable decline in those numbers. And so this is a piece of work that recently was awarded the the Australian Medical Research Excellence Award, and it was really the very first time that we went to those suicides in young people to understand what were the antecedents and what were young people experiencing before they died. And it's quite surprising that despite 3 decades of policy, this piece of work had never been done. It had never been informed by the young people who had died themselves, and that's a challenging thing to do, obviously. They're no longer here to tell us these stories. But what I was able to do was to read over 3,500 police, autopsy, coroners and toxicology reports to really find out with specific detail what was going on in these young people's lives so that we can see what are some of the key areas that we can focus on to prevent further deaths. So this is just a very brief snapshot of some of those findings. There was over 140 variables that we looked at. I've just provided two examples for you here today. But this is just one of them, where we found 30% of those young people who died by suicide weren't engaged in the education system, whether that be university or schools. And this is a critical finding from a suicide prevention perspective when we think that perhaps we need to be thinking about reaching these young people who aren't just in schools when it comes to bolstering, I guess, their mental health literacy and also our suicide prevention initiatives. So being able to be here today and knowing that organisations such as Mineral Resources have such a strong devotion to mental health is a really critical thing, and one that I think other organisations can learn from, because there are young people under the age of 25 who are dying by suicide that are not receiving, I guess, those traditional supports via university or other education settings. The other thing I wanted to touch on here was the fact that we were able to look at the proportion of young people who had a mental health diagnosis or suspected mental illness at the time of their death. And what we found here was approximately half, so 1 in 2 young people who died by suicide had a known mental health problem. But equally important is the 50% of young people who didn't. And what we've been able to do with these data is really begin to think about other psychosocial supports that we can put in place so that we can reach the 50% of young people who aren't seeking help and who aren't presenting to mental health services. And our research team at Telethon Kids Institute has recently received, in collaboration with RUA and Samaritans, $3 million to look at an alternative to emergency department model for young people experiencing suicidal crisis, so that they can perhaps have a place to go to receive those psychosocial supports. But we also have been able to use this data to look at suicide hotspots. And this is looking at areas in the country where the rates of suicide are highest, and perhaps look at how we can target these communities to strengthen them and to build capacity to prevent further deaths from occurring. And this is just an example of a piece of work I did where I mapped those suicides in Australia. There's 2 different ways that you can do that. You can look at coronial investigations into suicide clusters, but also use statistical techniques. And regardless of which technique you use, it's able to, I guess, identify those communities where the need is highest. This is a piece of work that's based on data from 2006 to 2016. And through this collaboration and partnership with Mineral Resources, we're able to update that with the most recent data over the last 5 years. Through these data, we're able to look at other factors, so who is at risk, so that idea of suicide contagion. And this graph is really a piece of research where we looked at young people who had lost a friend to suicide, and we were able to identify that critical period of risk for when friends and peers died themselves following the loss of a friend or peer. And what you can see here by the dotted line is that 50% of young people who had been exposed to the suicide of a peer died themselves within the first 90 days of exposure. So we were able to identify a critical window of opportunity for helping these young people. The other thing we were able to do is look at proximity. So are these young people living close to one another, or factors like social media connecting people across vast distances? And we found 50% of young people who died as a result of suicide contagion lived within 10 kilometres of each other. So there was that shared close spatial proximity. And this is really important when we start going into communities where we see the rates of suicide and where there are highs, because it does give us that certainty that there is a large spatial component involved with suicide prevention in addition to addressing mental health. So this is a piece of work where we went to communities that had experienced a suicide cluster, where there were greater than expected numbers of suicides or suicides that were socially linked by contagion mechanisms. And we asked, what are they doing? And how was their experience in responding to suicide clusters based on existing recommendations? And there was one community here in Western Australia in this piece of research who said, well, when young people die, we go on social media and we use the advertising features of Facebook to send out soft help-seeking messages to the postcodes, targeting the demographic characteristics of these young people to let them know that help is available. And it really was a pivotal moment for me, where I thought there are people in the community that are doing really innovative things in response to this problem. And we want to be able to document it so that we can share it with other communities to strengthen their response to youth suicide. And I'm really, really, I guess, proud to say that has really been supported by Mineral Resources in the next phase of this research, which is actually going into these communities, identifying what they're currently doing, what's working, and what can be done to strengthen their response to youth suicide so that we can save lives in these communities. So I guess where to from here? This is just a very small snapshot of the research that we're doing and where we intend to take it. But if there are a few take-home messages for those of you in the room today, I think that it's that the fact that when a suicide occurs, that first 90 days of exposure is really critical for getting that individual support and linking them in with help, whether it's practical support, getting meals on the table, and also specialist postvention or suicide bereavement support. And really looking beyond a mental health model of risk vulnerability and looking at that 50% of young people who don't have a mental health diagnosis and trying to capture those people within the services and systems that we have in place so that we can prevent further deaths. Going into the communities and capturing the innovative solutions, the grassroots solutions that they're already implementing, and sharing those with other communities so that they can learn from them and perhaps adopt them themselves. And ultimately, providing an avenue to share information so that we can better understand how to continue suicide prevention efforts here in WA and nationally. So thank you.
Absolutely remarkable work and incredibly valuable work that we need to all embrace and best appreciate. So thank you very much, Dr. Nicole. That was fantastic. Alrighty. Last but very much not least, introducing the wonderful Russell James, OAM. Russell, celebrity and fashion photographer, MinRes brand director, Order of Australia recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award at the 2022 Daily Front Row Fashion Awards. And over the past 2 years, or 2 decades, I should say, my apologies, my past 2 decades. Sometimes it feels that way. But over the past 2 decades, Russell has given us a unique perspective of the most prominent people of our time in fashion and entertainment. His photographs have appeared in leading fashion and celebrity publications around the world. Russell's fine artworks are exhibited in New York, Shanghai, Berlin, Melbourne, and as of this month, MinRes in Osborne Park, which we've all had the benefit of appreciating. Should have put that piece first, actually. Now, for Russell, having faced many setbacks in his early career, Russell's actually going to share with us tonight about overcoming rejection. I think it's a powerful piece. And how he became one of the world's most renowned celebrity and fashion photographers on the back of that. So over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I hope I don't appear rude. Sitting, I was told if I stand, I can't move, and if I stand, I will move. So I just wanted to start off with a couple of quick clarifications. One is anyone that believes that Chris Harris is at home sick, he's at Fraser's, he's using the handicap toilet as his base, running between courses. There is no chance he's at home. The second is that he said that everybody who has a driver's license had to have driving lessons. And I will just say there is no chance that my wife has ever had a driving lesson. I just want to be clear about that. Also, I dispute your 80-20, Chris, that 80% is looking out and 20% is looking in. It's about 75-25, 75 looking around this stuff and 25 out. So, and finally, that the hardest part about Walters Drive was getting Chris Ellison to enjoy the lake. It was getting him to stop referring to the lake as that fucking swamp across the road. And we have arrived at that point. We've agreed at wetlands and we're good. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak with you this evening. And it's just remarkable to sit here with people of such knowledge about such very important things and think that I possibly have anything to contribute. So I just want to start by saying that. When I chatted to Chris and when he asked me if it might be worthwhile speaking, I said exactly those words, what could I possibly contribute? And we had a bit of a chat about my career path, and he talked about wanting to really highlight what resilience is within our community. And I said, well, I really don't know much about resilience, but I know a hell of a lot about rejection. And he said, well, that's a really good place to start. And we had a chat about it. So I will tell you the conversation pretty much that I had with Chris at the beginning. Is something going to happen? There was a bell. Okay, sorry. Do I stop? Okay, no, that's good. So I'm from Western Australia, and I'm probably known as Russell James within my industry, but my full name was Russell Ivor James Tomter. No one's expected to remember that. But yeah, that was one of my first sort of experiences of rejection. It's an industry that rejected my name because they couldn't spell it. So I immediately had to shorten it to just my middle name, Russell James. I left Western Australia in about 1988, and I found myself travelling, and I fell in love with photography in about the year 1989, and in the country of Sweden. I was working for a photographer, sweeping his floors, doing anything I could to sort of get a glimpse of this industry. I had no idea that I actually loved photography, but once I started working in the darkroom and seeing the process, I was like, this is something I want to do. So I thought I would just take up photography, and I started to sort of work with anybody that I could, get experience anywhere that I could, and I literally was working, paying for the photographs to develop them, and then working again, doing anything pretty much to earn a living. And I figured out pretty quick while I was living in Sweden that if you were going to get a job as a photographer, that it was just as hard to get a job in Perth, in Stockholm, as it was probably in New York. That was my naive point of view. So I got the $199 round trip ticket after a while, and I went to New York and I started to show my portfolio. And this was in the beginning of 1990, and I'd been taking photographs. I would save some money and go to North Africa and take portraits of people. I would take landscape photographs. I would shoot anything that I possibly could, and had what I would call a portfolio. It was a mix of things. It was people, it was culture, it was landscapes, it was close-ups and objects. I went to New York and I harassed photo agents, and I would go and see them. And I had a revolving door, and that door started in about the year 1990. And it was pretty much, you know, if I got the appointment after days of harassing them, they usually gave me the appointment because I was fed up. And I would go in and show the book. And for that first year of 1990, there was pretty much thank you, goodbye, get out. And I thought, well, I can't keep this up forever because I have to save up the money and come back. I would go back to Stockholm where I was living. And this went on through the year 1991. Same thing, my photographs improved a little bit. So once or twice someone actually asked me a question like, what kind of photography do you like? And I said, well, just photography really. And they said, but do you like doing portraits of people or close-ups? And I was like, no, just pretty much photography. And they were like, okay, get out. So by 1992, I started to say, when someone asked if they stopped at a picture and they looked and it was a picture of a landscape, they said, what kind of photographs are you? I said, landscapes, pretty much. The rest is just to, fill the book, but it's landscapes. They're like, okay, thank you very much, get out, and, and thank you for coming. And this went on, and I could take you through the progression of the years, but it went on through 1996. And in the year 1996, I was, I think the technical term, on the bones of my ass, completely broke, and I realised that I'd put 6 years into this endeavour. And my mum and dad very responsibly were saying back in Perth, I have a sheet metal certificate, get back to Perth, you can still get a job before your ticket expires. And I was very close to that, and that would not have been a mistake, to be honest. But in the year 1996, I had one agent who took me in and said, there may just be something here. I'm going to send you to two clients. And they sent me along to a client called Sports Illustrated, which was a large, I think, Sports Illustrated. And they said, well, we're really looking at our swimwear edition, and the editor-in-chief was in this meeting. They said, what kind of photographs do you do? And I said, well, what kind of photographs do you do? And they said, well, we have a swimwear edition. And I said, well, I don't usually do sports photography, but, I'm sure I'm good at it. And they said, well, it's not actually sports photography. I left the meeting and went back to the agent. I described my encounter and I said, I think it went great. And she said, you're never getting a job. I'm just telling you now, this is not going to work. And lo and behold, the phone rang. They called and said, we see something. We'd love to give him an opportunity. So they told me at that point, we had a quick negotiation. They said, there's a particular project. I guess the real photographer hadn't shown up. And they said, if you can get on a plane and fly to the Bahamas, to Harbour Island, Bahamas, and there's a photo shoot there you could do. So I got on the plane. I did check how much it was going to cost me, how much, after I'd paid the ticket. I said, no, we're going to pay for your ticket. I'm like, well, this is definitely a scam. Something's going on. And I went to the Bahamas and I photographed a young lady at that time who had just basically started to become very successful in modelling. She was extraordinary and also extraordinary by her story. So she was the very first photo that I took for the US market. And, oh, by the way, this is called The Art of Rejection. And so I took a photo, and because I was a new photographer and she was used to very experienced photographers, there was something called the Polaroid that some of you know and some of you won't, but it was before you started shooting, you'd shoot a Polaroid to see what was going on. Now, having come from Sweden, where I'd been for the last 6 years really cutting my teeth, shooting day and night, I knew a thing or two about shooting in clouds, and there were heavy clouds at this particular shoot, and I knew all the tricks to do. And so I did that trick, and I pulled the Polaroid. I also knew the Polaroid was going to look terrible, and it did. And I showed her, and she for that moment walked off the set and said, I'll be back. I went, and there was a scurry of people and the hair and makeup, and I said, what's going on? And apparently the discussion was whether she would keep me on the job or not. But she did, to her credit, keep me on the job, and I shot a photograph of her. So that her name was Tyra Banks, and the cover was my first photograph in the US to publish. And this is where I started to learn a thing or two about my past. The cover was highly controversial. The reason it was controversial was the first time a black woman had appeared on the cover of what was considered an institutional magazine for the country, and it was absolutely extraordinary. So there was at that time, this is in the year 1996, a very big discussion by Time and the big players involved whether they would take that risk socially. they asked me about it. Looking at it, I said, I just have no idea what you're even talking about. I mean, she's the most amazing person I've ever seen in my life, and you'd be crazy not to publish it. So they did publish it, and it had about 30 million copies sold, which is a record to this day, which is bizarre in this world of magazines. But that was, I'd say, the first time that I realised something about my industry and come up in the conversation with Chris Harris. I said, so I think the best way to describe my industry is it's 99% rejection and 1% success. But, geez, when you get that 1%, you feel pretty good. But you still have to be able to endure that 99%. So from that point, and actually in my, at that moment, I really made a decision about trying not to ride the roller coaster. I had ridden the roller coaster, and by that I mean when things went good and someone said something positive, I'd go shooting up here, and when someone said something bad, I'd go rolling down here. And so I decided to try and keep the line a bit more even. If someone got me excited about something, I try to say, that's good, but I'll keep myself a little balanced. And from that period, I never learned how to use these, but from that moment it started to go very well. Now, I was always intrigued by the people I met going through the industry, because I thought every one of these people is here because they just got their magic moment, their break, their big moment, and it just went. And I'm like, I felt like mine was really hard. Not only that, after I got my first job and my second job, I was back to the same grind that I was when I'd started. I was back to showing my book. I was back being told, well, you're not what we're looking for. This isn't what we need. It's not about you. It's about the brand. All these things. And I felt like it was a grind, a very intense grind. And I thought, but for all these people, they just seem to show up and it just works and life is fantastic. And I thought, what's the difference? So am I the fraud in this situation? And, very likely I still am. So in shooting all these people, something else happened. I would obviously work with people over and over, and if I didn't screw up occasionally, I would be invited back, and sometimes you'd actually get to know the people and have over time meaningful conversations. I could say I met some fascinating characters. I was put backstage in the most extraordinary places. My wife is a political junkie, and for some reason I was dragged into the political world quite often to photograph as well. And over time, I got to see these people in what I would call their public setting in all these stages, and I felt like the complete and absolute standout fraud for being where I was. So I came across something I call the mythology of lucky breaks. I think, well, for me certainly, I look at the people next to me and I think, did they get their lucky break? But as I've sort of gone along in the years, I realise that all those things that we heard along the way, people saying the harder you work, the luckier you get. I talked about the roller coaster, not being on that. I think that lucky breaks are essentially something of mythology. A lot of things have to happen in order to get the lucky break. And it comes down to, in some ways, resilience. I have trouble separating resilience, rejection, success, and all these other things into where they should live. And lucky breaks has always been something for me. So these are some of the people that, of course, we'd think they're highly successful and they've only had a great ride. But as I got to know each have very profound and compelling stories. Kim Kardashian, who in some ways is just, the Insta girl of the world. We just see this lovely life, but she lost her father to cancer. They were caught up in a horrific murder. O.J. Simpson, as a family that split their family, ripped it to pieces, and she was just a young girl, essentially, found a way. I'd say Richard Branson, the one thing he taught me is he was only successful because of his ability to fail. He failed and failed and failed, and he just kept going. In fact, the island that I ended up photographing a book about his island because I was so fascinated, but the real story behind the book is that was where he took his now wife and where they fell in love, and he had not a brass razoo, and he actually went on in his life and now owns the island, which I think is a pretty compelling story, and that's where he and his wife live. But I just wanted to sort of round it out with this particular story, because I feel like when it comes to resilience, I learned a lot in this place. So regardless of your politics, who you like and who you don't, it's undeniable that two probably of the most successful people in the world. You have a person that was former president of the United States, and you have the first female nominee of a major party. And that's a hell of an accomplishment. However, even in this photograph where I happen to be standing with them, that is their home in Washington. That is the day of something called the Kavanaugh hearings, when he was being verified by the Senate. As I'm standing there with them, they were talking from that particular hearing about how they were running I think a child pornography scam through a pizza parlor. And I recalled Hillary Clinton, when she was campaigning, how she was ridiculed for her looks, how she was humiliated, how she was pretty much dragged around, and how the stuff you had to read about yourself on a daily basis. We could argue that ambition, essentially overcomes all. But probably a really good moment was sometime after the election, and she'd lost, devastated my wife, made my life hell. Secretary Clinton invited Ali and I at a private event to come into a room and have a chat. And I remember my wife saying how it was amazing what she had done. She said what she had done for women, for her kids. And it was an intense moment to see her just sort of say, I went through hell, and I'm so glad that I did it. So you never know where you're going to learn from, I guess is my story. I since have found a lot of the answers to things that I'm looking for in my own backyard. I've very much through Telethon Kids and Telethon Institute, I've had wonderful experiences around the world. This subject of suicide is not, it's local, it's in your own backyard, it's global. It's a very serious issue that we face. No more so than in the communities that are pictured here. And you just look at the most amazing culture, the longest continuing culture in the world, and you see the devastation caused by suicide, and probably nothing more tragic than a child suicide. And yet here we have this wonderful culture and place. So I have returned to those roots. It gives me great satisfaction. And it reminded me that everything I needed from the very beginning was right under my own nose in my own backyard. I could have avoided going to all those flights to New York and all that stuff, but anyway. So that's pretty much my conclusion, that for me, sitting with such incredibly knowledgeable people and making such a layman's conclusion, but for me, resilience, anxiety, depression, and success are somehow, for me, related. I think as people, we really struggle to sort that out sometimes, and I'm very grateful to live in a place where you have people such as yourselves, such as Chris Harris, to help us try and sort it out and keep it going. So that's pretty much the story, and thank you very much for coming out this beautiful weather evening. And Chris, you can go and get your main course now, buddy. It's okay. We're good. And thank you very much for having me.
Russell James. Fantastic, Russell. Thank you very much. All right, we're at the fun part of the evening. The opportunity for us all to ask some great questions of any of the great panellists that we've got here, whether it be Jenny, Nicole or Russell. What have we got left? We've got about a 15-minute window. Rachel? Yeah, thumbs up. 16-minute window to ask some questions and to engage. And just to set us off and to set a little bit of tone or a little bit of context for it, I've actually got one that was sent through a bit earlier from the MinRes payroll team that actually asked the question to your good self, Russell. It says here, after 19 years with MinRes, Why does Clay Greenbank not appear in any photos, videos, web campaigns or other for the organisation? We can discuss that one offline.
Okay.
Questions?
Hi, it's Susan from Lifeline WA. Jenny, question for yourself. Do you think that in your tenure you've seen services for young people become more accessible or less so?
I think in the tenure of 22 years, I often still get very disappointed that there is not the opportunity out there, and people can't find anybody to go and help them. So where, if you talk to, people within this industry throughout Australia, as I do sometimes, Pat McGraw is a really good friend, the feeling is that we don't have enough services. And so often in my 20-odd years, there seems to be gaps, where in the beginning, right back in 2000, there was nothing for younger than 12-year-olds. We couldn't find anything. Sure, CAMS was around, but there was not much around. We've come in leaps and bounds, I think, in some areas, but I don't think in others. And we can't get kids. I often still get calls to say, I can't get in to see a psychiatrist. There's a 6-month waiting list. Well, people die in 6 months. They don't wait to see somebody. So, yeah, we do have improvement, I think, in some areas, but I don't know what you think, Nicole, but in some not.
Yeah, so is this working? Yeah. This is also part of the piece of work that we're doing with the hotspot analysis, is looking at these areas and assessing the access to services, both post-pension services, mental health services and other services in the community, and not only looking at which ones exist, but what ones are actually open when young people are experiencing suicidal crisis. So we're looking at, for example, the time of death when young people are dying, and doing an audit of those services to see whether, for example, are they occurring at 7 p.m. when your local headspace centres might not necessarily be open. And also looking at the opportunity cost for those access to services. So when young people are at school from 8 until 3 p.m, they really only then have a 3-hour opportunity to access services. So we've got a lot to do in terms of answering that question, because it's not just simple as, yes, access has improved, because what is access? And I think that can change if we start to, again, look at the details, looking at when access is most needed, at time of day, whether people have access to transport to reach those services, and a full range of other factors. But I'm happy to say that our team, the youth mental health team at TKI, is we're doing research into that every day as a result. Yeah.
Just a comment and a question for all the panellists. I think sitting here today, I feel pretty fortunate, to hear 4 panellists share some of their passions around mental health, particularly youth suicide prevention, being, from a younger generation. Like I know, Jen, you spoke a little bit about the year 2000 and the landscape that presented then, and I think it's pretty powerful that we sit here in 2022 and we can speak so openly about mental health, and Nicole, some of your research as well. So I guess I grew up in a small country town, and hearing you speak a little bit about, spatial distribution around suicide and how that looks. So yeah, growing up in a small farming community, I know how powerful that sort of commentary is, and I've seen it rip my town to pieces, to be honest. So yeah, appreciate your research there. So I guess following on from that, Jen, question from you, the year 2000, if you talk about, the landscape, interested to hear what really drove you to to, I guess, generate youth focus, push the message out, considering it was perhaps niche at the time. Interested to hear some commentary, and as well, a comment for you too, Clay. I think you're doing a good job, mate, so thank you.
You can have one of these awards.
Look, I came back from the Philippines and from living in Asia after 4 years in 2000. And I'd always been a corporate girl, worked in the corporate area, but when I was in the Philippines, I started working with street kids, especially young boys. And when I came back here, I had an opportunity actually to join the WACA in marketing and sales. And I decided that, no, I would join what I said to you was a cowboy outfit, because what I saw with resilience, which I think is something that, Russell's talked about, in the Philippines with these children of 4 years old up, was this resilience to survive. And when they were given us some structure and some love and some really very little, but they thrived on it, and they grew, and they were given education. And so I was passionate when I came back from there. And I thought, well, my youngest child was 16 and, pretty self-sufficient. And so I just decided that was a good thing for me to be able to give back, having seen how just that worked in the Philippines amazingly. I can't tell you, I can still get quite teary over it, because the children were just wonderful, absolutely wonderful, with the smallest of small things, and they thrived, the education, etc., etc. And so that's probably why. And when I did first start, as I said, I'd go in and talk to CEOs of organisations. And my husband was in the hotel business in five-star hotels, so I had lots of opportunities to go and talk to people. They couldn't accept it. And I can remember one such person, the night of our about second youth focus ball, and I badgered him into coming and taking a table. And he just came up to me afterwards and said, "Can you please contact me? Because I had no idea of these statistics, none." And I mean, that really said to me, my gosh, how much work do we have to do that we can come like we are tonight? And I mean, it really warms my heart to be able to see that we can talk about it, because we couldn't talk about it then, I can tell you. It was really almost a no-no. Don't know if that answers the question, but I think, yeah.
Well said, Jenny. Beautiful. Probably got time for one more question, if we could, Rachel. 2 questions. 3 questions.
Oh, fantastic.
Very good.
He's getting the dessert.
Yeah, can we please bring Chris back, if that's all right? Yeah, hello. How are you, mate?
Yep, hi.
Hi, Chris. What I was wondering is, if those in the room and perhaps know someone that might have a mental, or they think might have a mental health issue, I wonder if you could talk about what some of perhaps the warning signs are, and then what we can do as friends and family members if we think someone's in a bit of trouble. What can we do?
And was that directed at me, I'm thinking?
Yes, it was, Chris.
Fantastic. Some people who probably heard me speak and around, that the brain and mental health is not too different to physical health. And the people around us, our loved ones, our friends, our colleagues, are actually the best people to notice if there's some changes. Now, some of those changes that we noticed earlier on are things such as perhaps they're not laughing as much, or they're not as social, or they're finding it harder to make decisions. And I think it's having the courage of letting them know that we've noticed that change earlier, of having, like I said, it can be hard, but of saying, I notice there's something different with you. It's actually very hard for people to come out and actually say that there's something that they're struggling with. it's much easier if somebody that knows them is able to notice that and they're able to nod their head. So if we say, it looks like there's some difficult things happening in your life, it's much easier to be able to nod, but it requires us as the people around them to acknowledge that. And the other thing that we're doing now is, in psychology, we used to really be kind of pathology or problem-based focus, saying you've got a problem. And we've moved away from that now. We're actually back to that future focus where we say, let's build your strength again. Let's build your capacity. Let's have a look at what's possible. And so we want to encourage people that getting mental health support is not because they have a problem, but is to build capacity to the life that they want to live. And when we talk in that way, we see people move in that direction. So I think it's how we frame it in some of the language, and, keen to hear from the other panelists there. Because our brain has a default mechanism to avoid deficit. If we say, are you okay? I'm fine. There's something wrong with you? No, there's not. I don't need to see Chris. You go and see Chris. Around that. Our brain will defend against deficit. So when we frame it, though, in around capacity, which is, no, this is about you enjoying life again, and I want to see you smile, then we're much more likely to move people to those services. So I hope that's helpful. But Nicole, Jenny, Russell, you may have some other thoughts on that.
I'll step in just very briefly. I think one of the things, at least in the youth space, is we always say that just ask a young person, especially if you think that they might be having thoughts of suicide. Asking whether someone is thinking of suicide does not increase their risk of acting on that behaviour. In fact, it increases their risk of getting help. So we always encourage people not to avoid that conversation, and also to be mindful of your own attitudes towards mental health, because we can all internalise stigma. And if this is the first time that someone may be speaking about their mental health, or the first time that you ask, that initial reaction that you make can really set the trajectory of them asking for help ever again. And so having that reflection around your own attitudes and whether you're willing or able to provide support or be the right person to ask that is an important consideration.
Fantastic. Rach, we've got time for one more.
All right, mine's really, really quick. Nicole, this is directed directly at you. Sorry very much for putting you on the spot here, but one of the things that you mentioned about was with the money that you've received from Mineral Resources, that you will be looking at alternate methods in terms of what you would like to explore and how you're looking at mental health. What I would like to know is, based on the fact that a lot of young people, their first instance of when they usually seek mental health is when it's at a critical point, and usually they don't know where to go, and most of the things that they go to is like a hospital, because that's where people see their most clinical sense, right? And people just don't know where to turn to. So what are some of the alternate methods or different methods that you will be potentially looking at in terms of in that space? Like, what are some of those areas? And again, you might not know them off the top of your head. I know that it's very much a start of your journey, and thank you very much for nodding and agreeing that that's probably where your head's at. But what I would like to know is, what are some of those areas where you may be potentially looking at those alternative methods being spent?
Yeah, and so a key part of this project is first identifying what factors are placing communities at risk, and then auditing them to find out what services are available and what the potential gaps are. But what we know is that suicide, there are many causes for it, and as you saw in the data, 50% of those cases involve mental health, and others don't. And some of the other factors that we observed are things like relationship breakdowns, financial difficulties, and difficulty finding employment. And so being able to have a central place for young people to seek support that taps into those range of psychosocial supports through employment support and relationship management and emotion regulation. I mean, there's a whole range of different things. Part of this project is acknowledging that there's no one-size-fits-all approach, and we need to be going into these communities and conducting audits based on the needs of that community because as you can see at a national level, the approach is really, I think, in my opinion, and I think the data tells us that as well, is we're not being specific enough, and we're not being, I guess, taking that individual approach at a community level, because what's going on in metropolitan Perth is significantly different to what's happening in Derby, for example, or the Peel region, where you've got a really, I guess, large geographic area with different accesses to services within that specific region even, so.
Thanks, Bob. All right, I know there's plenty of questions want to be asked, but we're going to get a little opportunity at the end because we're going to be able to still enjoy a little bit of cheese and dessert up the back there, Rachel, is that correct? And a couple of drinks. So I do need to wrap it up because we need to be respectful and mindful of the time that we've got in front of us. So can we have Chris back? Oh my.
I think it's dessert.
Yeah, we thought he might have been there, Russell.
You've got chocolate mousse on your chin, Chris, just here.
Have I?
There you go, buddy.
I'll shoo the waiter away.
So stay with us a little bit longer, Chris. Won't be long. You'll be okay. You watch, you'll swan back into work tomorrow too, about 10 o'clock. Alrighty, so this is the final close from a good self on behalf of everyone that's here this evening. First and foremost, I'd like to pay thanks to all of you for attending tonight and being committed behind such a worthwhile mission that I think we're all on in the modern day, in the modern world. I think we all know someone that's been impacted one shape, form or another. So thank you very much for your attendance and some great questions asked. I will reward those as the night moves forward. I'll bring those out to a few different parties. So a massive thank you to the wonderful Jenny here, because you know the platform, the foundation's been laid very much by your good self through the very tireless hard work, the perseverance, the grit that you've demonstrated through those early years and those really challenging years and tough years, and especially in that non-for-profit space where it wasn't the norm and it wasn't the mainstream. So thank you very much, Jenny. Dr. Nicole, the work that you're currently doing, the work that's going to take us forward, the research that's so valuable and can help us to pinpoint in on those things. So absolutely incredible work, fascinating work, valuable work, and we wish you so well in your endeavours. So thank you very much. Russell James, walking inspiration, role model for all of us. Seriously, great story. Great to get to know Russell and to listen to his story. You know, it's an inspirational story. I often say to people in the space of resilience or leadership or whatever it needs to be, we need to find role models. We need to find walking examples of, because it at times gives us the courage to be able to step forward out of our comfort zones and do much the same. So thank you very much, Russell. Chris Harris, where is he? Oh my goodness. I don't know if I can keep doing this, to be honest with you. But Chris Harris, look, everyone that knows Chris Harris knows that he's just an absolute, I don't know how to describe it. He's a champion of mental health. He's a champion of people. We're so much better for having him in our organisation. He rolled into MRL, he rolled into MinRes, Mineral Resources, and he sort of painted his vision, his mission, his picture to the likes of my good self. And I said, well, we'll see how we go. But my God, he's made a change, and he's changed. He's moved the toughest of mindsets in an environment that's challenging at the best of times, and he's done tremendous work, and incredible, remarkable human being. He puts these events on for us. That being said, obviously with the help of the wonderful comms team and the rest of the support. But a massive thank you to Chris Harris for this fantastic evening that even on his deathbed, he's present. I also want to go back to the beginning if I could. I just want to thank the Telethon Kids Institute. I want to thank Youth Focus, Lifeline WA, Shooting Stars, Murdoch University, The Y, the wonderful Coralie Bishop for hosting us tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone in Terrence. Thanks to our leadership, and let's enjoy some cheese and desserts. Rachel, that's not cheese and desserts. I've also got a little gift here. Is that what we're alluding to? We got there in the end. That was the worst attempt at interpretive dance. I thought you were pointing to the person beside you. We've got some wonderful gifts here for our wonderful guest speakers, and just like to present to you. Thank you very much, Jenny. Nicole, thank you. Russell, thanks very much. Thank you. I got there in the end, Rachel. Thanks. How are we going for time? Good? Cheese, desserts, drinks, network. Thank you very much, everybody.